Pablo Picasso once said, "He was my one and only master. Don't you think I've looked at his paintings? I spent years studying them. Cezanne, he was like the father of us all." In 1895, a French painter from a small town of Aix-en-Provence was given the first solo exhibition of his work in the heart of the art world, Paris. This huge exhibition, showcasing some 150 works, was the break the artist needed for fame and financial success. Paul Cézanne had been painting for more than 40 years with little public recognition. But when his exhibition opened, he wasn't there. He stayed home in Provence, painting.
Cezanne in Provence is made possible by a generous grant from the Eugene B. Casey Foundation.
There are treasures to be taken away from this country, which has not yet found an interpreter equal to the abundance of riches which it displays. Paul Cézanne.
What set Paul Cézanne apart was his lifelong quest to paint the land that gave birth to him, and to which he would always return. Cézanne wrote,
"It is only there that I have found true evidence of the life of our light, present in its simplest form, the austere and tender beauty of our Provence."
Provence and Cézanne defined each other. As a child, he ran in its fields, bathed in its streams, and climbed its hills. One companion, a boy named Émile Zola, would grow up to be as important an author as Cézanne was an artist. When Zola left their hometown, Aix-en-Provence, the young Cézanne wrote to his friend,
"My dear Émile, do you remember the pine tree which, planted on the bank of the river Arc, bowed its shaggy head above the steep slope extending at its feet? This pine which protected our bodies from the blaze of the sun. Ah, may the gods preserve it from the woodcutter's axe."
Cezanne and his friends were very well versed in the classics, so they had a very deep understanding of Arcadian literature, the way that Virgil and other writers created an Arcadian world, a perfect world. And when they looked at the beautiful countryside around Aix-en-Provence, the unspoiled countryside as it was at that time, they saw themselves in a sense living in a modern Arcadia.
Émile Zola left Aix for Paris in 1858 at age 18, but the excitement of the capital could not dim the fond memories of his childhood home.
Paris is big, full of amusements, of charming women. Aix is small, monotonous, petty, also full of women. God forbid I should slander the women of Aix. And in spite of that, I prefer Aix to Paris. Is it because of the trees swaying in the breeze? Because of the wild gorges, the rocks piled high on top of each other? Is it the landscape of Provence which draws me there? I do not know. Yet, my poet's dreams tell me that a rough rock is worth more than a freshly whitewashed house. The murmur of the waters is more than that of a big town. Virgin nature more than nature starched and tormented.
And yet Paris was the only place to be for an ambitious young writer or painter. Zola wrote to Cezanne,
Paris offers you an advantage which you could find nowhere else. From 6 in the morning until 11 o'clock, you could paint from a living model in an art school studio, then take your lunch. And from 12 until 4 in the afternoon, you could copy a masterwork which attracts you in the Louvre or in the Luxembourg Museum. That would mean 9 working hours. I believe that is sufficient.
But Cezanne had obligations. His father had worked hard to become a successful banker. He wanted his son to play it safe, to enroll in law school.
Alas, I've taken the tortuous path of law. Taken is not the word. I was forced to take it. The law, the horrid law, will make my life miserable for 3 years.
Cezanne longed to study art in Paris, but even in his youth, he knew that it would never replace home. He wanted to be an original, an artist of unique vision. Émile Zola agreed.
My dear Cezanne, I approve completely of your idea of coming to Paris to work and then returning to Provence. I believe that this is a way to escape from the influence of the schools and to develop some originality, if one has any.
When Cezanne's father reluctantly gave in to his son's dreams, Paul immediately left for Paris, arriving in 1861.
I have seen the Luxembourg and Versailles and the Louvre.
Living on a small allowance from his father, Cezanne took classes and copied the work of the masters, but struggled and was his own worst critic. Émile Zola wrote,
Sometimes, so you tell me, you throw your brushes at the ceiling when your results do not come up to your ideas. Why this discouragement, this impatience?
I must confess, my heart is not very gay. I fritter away my petty existence to the right and to left. I have not been able to touch my painting.
To prove something to Cezanne would be like trying to persuade the towers of Notre Dame to dance a quadrille. Nothing can bend him. Nothing can wring a concession from him. Otherwise, he remains the best fellow in the world.
He was a young provincial artist with a heavy Provençal accent. And he fell in with the circle around Edouard Manet. Manet was a very sophisticated, totally Parisian artist. And the artists who worked around him were similar, very high bourgeois, confident, sophisticated Parisians. And Cezanne came there and really felt the country bumpkin.
As for me, old man, my hair and my beard are longer than my talent.
Rather than try to emulate them, he played up the role of the rebel artist, the rough country type. There's a famous story where he met Manet for the first time, and Manet put out his hand to shake Cezanne's hand, and Cezanne said, oh no, please don't shake my hand, I haven't washed for a week.
That was his whole goal, to make a point of being a Provençal, someone from an entirely different culture. That's why he spoke Provençal. All around Paris, he wore his Provençal outfit. You know, he had a red belt wrapped around his waist. That was part of the traditional Provençal dress.
Like other ambitious artists of his time, Cezanne submitted his work to the all-powerful, government-sanctioned exhibition called simply the Salon. Each year, an elite jury sat in judgment with the power to make or break a career. Rewarding technical skill over artistic innovation, they rejected anything that threatened the status quo.
The Impressionists, and indeed Cezanne himself, had a somewhat ambivalent attitude to this world. Cezanne actually always wanted to be accepted at the Salon, but he realized that he wasn't going to be, so he took the contrary route and actually did provocative paintings that he knew would be rejected.
On Saturday, we're going to the Champs-Élysées to bring our canvases, which will make the Institute blush with rage and despair.
In 1866, Cezanne sent his portrait of Anthony Valabregue, who was a poet and a friend of his from Aix-en-Provence, to the Salon. He knows it will be rejected, so that's also a way of getting publicity. I mean, in a way, it was a self-promotion to be seen to be thwarting the authorities.
As was expected, Paul has been refused by the Salon jury, so have all the others. They have gone back to work.
Although working among the Impressionists, Cezanne managed to stand apart from them, striving to make a unique contribution to the form.
Not an easy thing to do when there was so much competition around in Paris in the 1860s and 70s. His work done in Paris in the 1860s is dark, dramatic, often very thickly and awkwardly painted, and I think this was a deliberate provocation to his contemporaries to show that he was a rough, tough, provincial artist laying on the paint by the trowel load. He painted in a very bold, thick way, which was later called couillard or ballsy, meaning that it's kind of very strong and expressive and exaggerated.
We think of the Impressionists, Monet, Manet, and Renoir, among others, as being rebels themselves, but essentially this is a little bit of a romanticized view. They were courting both the establishment and the rebellious avant-garde. Now Cezanne was one step further than them in rebelliousness.
The others, Courbet, Manet, Monet, etc., feel and see as I do, but they have no courage. They paint pictures for the Salon. I, however, dare. I dare. I have the courage of my convictions, and he who laughs last laughs best.
He develops more and more in the original direction which his nature prescribes for him. I have great hopes.
Traveling back and forth between Paris and Aix, Cezanne practiced his craft and searched for his own style. He used his family in Aix as models, including his sister playing the piano. A mutual friend wrote, "My dear Zola, when Cezanne returns to Paris, you will see some pictures that you will like very much. Among others, a portrait of his father in a big armchair, which looks very good. The painting is light in color and the attitude very fine."
Cezanne's feelings for his father, even in the 1860s, come out strongly in the great portrait, where he's shown reading the newspaper L'Événement. It shows him as a very imposing figure, but also it's a portrait done with great care and affection. In fact, the way that Cezanne, throughout his life, laid such an important emphasis on work, on hard work, is almost an attempt to prove to his father that becoming an artist in Paris or wherever was not just becoming a bohemian and sitting around and smoking drugs and hanging out with models, but actually was serious, solid, intellectual and physical work.
However, in 1869, the painter met a Parisian model, Hortense Fiquet. She became his lover, his lifelong companion, and the mother of his child.
My sense is that she was a commanding and strong-willed woman, which would be a good match for Cezanne, likewise a commanding, strong-willed man. And she held the household, he was the artist.
But Cezanne kept his family hidden from his father for more than a decade.
Which is strange indeed, because Cezanne's own parents were in fact from quite humble origins, and they only married themselves after Cezanne and his sisters were born.
His mother was the typical wife and mother of a provincial household, self-effacing, always out to support her children. His mother knew about his relationship. His mother knew about the son, her grandchild. So she was in the secret.
Beginning in the late 1860s, Cezanne's work was profoundly affected by his close friendship with the Impressionist Camille Pissarro.
Pissarro was a kind of paternal figure for Cezanne, in many ways replacing the father figure that he always wished to have and didn't find in his own father.
And what Pissarro taught him, and in the broader sense what he learned from Impressionism, was to work out of doors, to experience nature at first hand, and to paint nature with a broad, free, brushy technique.
While residing in Paris, Cezanne spent each summer in Aix-en-Provence, applying the lessons of Pissarro and the Impressionists to his own native landscape.
All pictures painted inside in the studio will never be as good as those done outside. When out-of-door scenes are represented, the contrast between the figures and the ground is outstanding, and the landscape is magnificent. I shall have to make up my mind only to do things out of doors.
When France declared war on Prussia in 1870, Cezanne left Paris and settled in the village of L'Estaque on the Mediterranean coast. Just 18 miles from Aix-en-Provence, it offered a new and inspiring landscape. It also kept him safe from the conscription officer and kept his family secret from the prying eyes of his father. His studies of the sea at L'Estaque led to a gradual lightening of his palette and to a new way of capturing light on canvas.
My dear Émile, I shall not return to Paris before next year. I have rented a little house and garden at L'Estaque, just above the station and at the foot of the hill, where behind me rise the rocks and the pines. I am still busy painting. As you say, there are some very beautiful views here. The difficulty is to reproduce them. I began to see nature rather late, though this does not prevent it being full of interest for me.
Cezanne's art develops as a way of rejecting Paris and taking on Provence as his one and only context, while at the same time trying to apply to Provence what he learned from Paris.
He wrote back to his friend Pissarro in Paris that for the first time he understood what the Impressionists meant by using patches of color as opposed to modeling in tone.
Cezanne actually draws very little under his oil paintings, very faintly, just to put things in place, and then essentially the work is being done with a color.
The traditional academic way of painting was to model a form gradually from light to dark or vice versa. What the Impressionists introduced was a way of painting where juxtaposing colored brush marks, patches of color, which would serve to model a form.
My dear Pissarro, I have started 2 little motifs with the sea. It's like a playing card. Red roofs over the blue sea. The sun here is so tremendous that it seems to me as if objects are silhouetted not only in black and white, but in blue, red, brown, and violet. I may be mistaken, but this seems to me to be the opposite of modeling.
In 1874, Claude Monet organized an independent exhibition entirely free of the Salon's rigid ideals. It included paintings by names now recognized among the most famous in the history of art: Degas, Renoir, and Cezanne. The exhibit was both popular and controversial. One critic singled out Cezanne for special mention, describing him as a sort of idiot who paints in the throes of delirium tremens. Undaunted, Cezanne continued to associate himself with his Impressionist colleagues, but he also kept apart from them, sometimes abstaining from their exhibitions, and soon moving beyond them in style and content.
We must not be satisfied with retaining the beautiful formulas of our illustrious predecessors. Let us go forth to study nature. Let us try to free our minds from them. Let us strive to express ourselves according to our personal temperament.
The way he took one phase of modern art and transformed it into something entirely different. Impressionism into an art of greater expression and abstraction is wonderful. It's his way of calling himself a link.
Cezanne once famously remarked that he wanted to make the art of Impressionism something solid and serious, like the art of the museums. He wanted to reconcile the immediacy of Impressionist painting with the more solid, meaningful compositions of the old masters he admired.
I am beginning to consider myself stronger than all those around me, and you know that good opinion I have of myself has only been reached after serious consideration. I have to work all the time. I must strive after perfection only for the satisfaction of becoming truer and wiser.
Maybe his greatest goal was to try to put into permanent artistic form his feeling of engagement with the world, his sense of being in the world, if you like, his existential experience as a man and an artist, to somehow capture that in paint, to render, as he said very often, a harmony parallel to nature. A wonderful example of his harmony parallel to nature would be the great late watercolor which he made from the terrace of his studio at Les Louvres, looking across the city of Aix-en-Provence, where you see the tower of the cathedral and the mountains beyond. And it's a great watercolor in the way in which he lays these wonderful color washes one on top of the other in a very rhythmic way across a sheet of paper. It has its own internal logic, its own internal harmony, parallel to the divine harmony, as he would say, in nature.
When you listen to a music, you don't know how to write notes or things like that. It's just you hear that and you feel well or not well. And it's the same with the painting, but it's with your eyes. And when you read a poem, it's the same thing. You have emotion. And that's what the painter tried to give you.
As Cezanne moved into middle age, he anchored himself in his beloved Provence. His focus on its unique landscape helped him to grow in new directions. He made his own way and helped set the standard for those who would follow.
I still see before me the powerful landscapes of my youth. I feel so strongly that I belong to them, that what little love and truth there is in me comes from their tranquil passion.
The family home near Aix, called the Jardin de Buffon, was an especially resonant subject. Acquired by Cezanne's father in 1859, it came to embody their complex relationship. Though disappointed with his son's chosen profession, Cezanne's father also showed his support, building a studio on the top floor and allowing his son to paint life-size murals in the main salon.
The Jardin de Buffon gave Cezanne somewhere that was private, a kind of almost a secret studio, both in the house and then in the grounds, a kind of outdoor studio, where he could work uninterrupted, unobserved, and develop his art.
Cezanne executed his first open-air paintings in the grounds of the Jardin de Buffon. Ultimately, painting the view of the Montagne Saint-Victoire seen through a screen of trees.
Cezanne painted the Montagne Saint-Victoire like no one else. First of all, it was just there. When you're in Aix-en-Provence, when you take a trip out of town, it dominates the surrounding landscape. As mountains go, it's not a very tall mountain. It's something like 4,000 feet. So compared with the Rockies or the Alps, it's not a big mountain. But it has a tremendous presence in the local landscape because everything around it is pretty flat.
My dear Émile, when I went to Marseille, a stunning motif appears on the east side, Sainte-Victoire and the rocks that dominate.
It's quite possible that Paul Cezanne was painting right at this very spot 100 years ago. He painted 9 major oil paintings from this spot and a number of watercolors, so we could say it really was one of his obsessive motifs.
Montagne Saint-Victoire held both a philosophical and aesthetic fascination for Cezanne. He understood that it was ancient. His friend Marion had discovered prehistoric remains there. It had been a religious symbol in pre-Roman times. And it had tremendous personal associations for him. It was a place where Zola and their other friends had explored during their carefree youth. It presided over the landscape that he had loved so much as a child.
He loved the changing light, the changing colors, and expressed it in the whole series of nearly a dozen paintings, all taken from the same point of view.
I am still striving to discover my way as a painter. Nature presents me with the greatest difficulties.
Cezanne deeply loved the quarry at Bibimus. It's a place where he could almost literally penetrate the landscape of his native Provence. He went down deep into the quarry underground, and there he loved the silence and the solitude and the escape from the world around him. Also, I think he was attracted by the way the rocks had been cut, by the striations of the chisels that we can still see today, was something that I think appealed to his aesthetic sensibility and found a kind of correspondence in his own brushwork. Cezanne rambled all over this countryside looking for just the right motif in his landscape painting. He visited the supposed house of the sculptor Pierre Puget, and clearly the historical association of that place was important to him. I think there's a good deal of self-identification on the part of the artist with a lonely house set in woods or in rocky terrain. He loved the solitude of the back country behind L'Estaque, where he painted the dramatic rocks. It has a kind of primeval feeling still, and I think Cezanne responded to that remoteness.
Climbing the hills and the sun goes down, one has a glorious view of Marseille in the background, all enveloped towards evening to a very decorative effect.
In 1886, after a decade of secrecy, Cezanne's father learned of Hortense and of his grandson Paul Jr. All were reconciled, and Hortense and Cezanne were married, just months before his father's death. But in that same year, Émile Zola published L'Œuvre, a novel which featured a barely concealed and unflattering portrait of Cezanne. Zola wrote,
He threw himself into the impossible task of putting all nature on one canvas, and exhausted himself without ever bringing forth the expected work of genius.
It was the end of their friendship.
In spite of his excellent nature and rich natural gifts, Paul cannot bear any criticism, however gentle it may be.
It wasn't often that Cezanne could be drawn away from his home, but in 1894, some of the leading artists of the time gathered at the home of Claude Monet in Giverny. Monet wrote, I hope Cezanne will join us, but he is so strange and so shy of new faces that I fear he will let us down. He is a true artist, but has far too many doubts about himself. Cezanne did attend. One female artist described him in vivid detail. When I first saw him, I thought he looked like a cutthroat with large eyeballs standing out from his head in a most ferocious manner, a rather fierce-looking, pointed beard, and an excited way of talking that positively made the dishes rattle. I found out later that far from being fierce or a cutthroat, he has the gentlest nature possible. He doesn't believe that everyone should see alike.
My dear Monet, here I am then, landed again in the South, from which I should perhaps never have separated, in order to fling myself into the chimerical pursuit of art. To end, may I tell you how happy I was about the moral support received from you, which served as a stimulus for my painting.
In 1895, gallery owner Ambroise Vollard came across Cezanne's work at a Parisian art supply shop, where artists traded canvases for supplies. He was inspired, and a solo show was arranged.
Dear Monsieur Vollard, I do not think that I shall in any way harm the course of my studies by exhibiting.
The exhibition featured some 150 canvases and promised the artist widespread public recognition. But Cezanne chose not to attend.
He both wanted recognition but didn't want it. And he, in fact, was quite upset when he read some of the reviews of the show, even positive reviews, that his work was becoming known. It's very puzzling in a way, but he, I think, lived for his art and was in a way disdainful about its public success, yet at the same time it's hard to believe he didn't somehow enjoy that at the end of his life.
He was like a monk, in fact. That's why he wanted to be alone, free and alone, and he didn't like to have someone around him when he painted.
Visitors arrived in Aix, seeking the man whose paintings had inspired a new vision of what art might achieve. But the reclusive Cezanne was not pleased.
I thought that one could do good painting without attracting attention to one's private life. Certainly an artist wishes to raise himself intellectually as much as possible, but the man must remain obscure. The pleasure must be found in the work.
Gauguin met him and wrote very interestingly about that meeting, and how Cezanne was almost like an ancient shepherd from prehistoric times sitting on top of a mountain contemplating nature and the stars. So he saw him as a philosopher.
In 1899, the Jas de Buffon had to be sold after Cezanne's mother's death. And at that point, one of his friends made a final visit to the house with Cezanne, and he described Cezanne breaking down in tears in front of the portrait of his father in the house. He was so moved and upset by the selling of the house, partly because it was so deeply associated with his father, with whom he had very affectionate memories.
After the sale of the Jas de Buffon, Cezanne bought an apartment in Aix, on the Rue Bourlegon. He built a studio on the top floor, with a north-facing window for the best light. He lived there for several years, but the space was small and cramped, and he felt the need to have a larger studio.
Dear Monsieur Vollard, I have had a studio built on a small plot of land that I bought for that purpose. I shall inform you of the results achieved as soon as I have obtained some satisfaction from my efforts.
This is the Atelier des Louvres, the studio which Cezanne built at the very end of his life in 1902, and where he worked principally for the last 4 years until his death in October 1906. He built it for two main reasons. One was that he needed isolation to work successfully. The town was noisy and busy, he had too many visitors coming to his studio, and he didn't like people prying when he was at work. The second reason was that he had begun at the end of his life to paint some monumental canvases, mainly devoted to the female nude, and he needed a very large space in which to paint them, and this room fitted the bill.
This is a big theme for Cezanne, his relationship to the female body, to females, and to the nude. He applies to them the kind of distortive qualities that he applies to everything, to bottles, to houses, to trees, to apples. It's all part of that deliberate awkwardness, that primitivizing quality that he wants to establish as an aesthetic value, which he also sees as being an aesthetic value of the provincial countryside. He modified the more naturalist way of looking at nature, which was the Impressionist way, in a more abstracted, more stylized way, which had very many similarities with popular culture.
The studio was constructed with this very large north window. Cezanne, like most painters, liked the cool, clear northern light when he was working, and there were also drapes there so that he could adjust the intensity of light, because the light here in Provence can be very, very bright indeed. And then also behind me you see a special tall, narrow doorway, a kind of slot, which he had built in, again, especially so that he could roll the very large canvases in and out of the studio. The studio remains much as Cezanne left it. Many of the objects were here during his lifetime, including the big ladder which he used to paint the top part of the very large paintings. Bowls of fruit designed to evoke the atmosphere of his studio. A small plaster Cupid, which in his lifetime was attributed to the Provençal artist Pierre Puget, whom he greatly admired. We also see his painting boxes which he took out into the countryside when he went plein air painting.
The man of letters expresses himself in abstractions, whereas a painter, by means of drawing and color, gives concrete form to his sensations and perceptions. Get to the heart of what is before you.
The long years of hard work had brought him to the very position he had sought from the beginning. His work was forever linked to the landscape, but it never stopped evolving.
Within the views he painted of the mountain from near Les Louvres between 1902 and his death in 1906, there's quite a variety of style. And I think it depended on the quality of light at the time, the effects of color and light that he saw in the landscape and was trying to match in his paintings. we need to take into consideration too that Cezanne's eyesight may have been failing towards the end of his life. This is perhaps a rather controversial point of view, but we shouldn't forget that he had been suffering from diabetes since 1890. A remarkable example of his late abstraction is the painting taken from the terrace of the studio at Les Louvres, looking across Aix-en-Provence. And there we see broad areas, broad patches of color, which are really abstract. At first it's hard to determine what you're looking at. I think he couldn't see clearly, but he was responding to these color sensations he was receiving from the sky and the landscape itself.
Now, being old, nearly 70 years, the sensations of color which give the light are for me the reason for the abstractions, which do not allow me to cover my canvas entirely, nor to pursue the delineation of the objects where their points of contact are fine and delicate. On the other hand, the planes fall one on top of the other. Nature, if consulted, gives us the means of attaining the end.
When Cezanne heard of Zola's death in 1902, he broke into tears and locked himself away. The sense of frustration he had often shared with his old friend had never lessened.
My age and health will never allow me to realize my dream of art, which I have been pursuing all my life. To my mind, one does not put oneself in place of the past. One only adds a new link.
He was looking for something that he always seemed to be beyond what he had created. In some ways, is that he never recognized the value of his works.
The aging artist was also unhappy with the changes wrought in his beloved landscapes.
I remember perfectly the once so picturesque coast of L'Estaque. Unfortunately, what is called progress is nothing but the invasion of bipeds who will not rest until they have transformed everything into hideous caves with gas lamps. And, what is even worse, with electric lights. What times we live in.
He wrote often to his son Paul.
My dear Paul, in order to give you news as satisfactory as you would like, I would need to be 20 years younger. I eat well, and a little moral satisfaction would do me a lot of good, but work alone can give me that. I am waiting for 4 o'clock. The carriage will take me to the river by the bridge of the Trois Sautets. I felt very well there yesterday. I started a watercolor. I am going up to the studio. I get up late this morning, after 5 o'clock. My dear Paul, I have nothing to do but paint.
Cezanne was already moving into a mood of greater distance and bitterness from the artistic world of his time, especially the world of artistic trade, of galleries, exhibitions. In fact, he wasn't interested in showing anymore. What absorbed him by them was entirely problems that had to do with his painting. How do you handle volume? How do you handle perspective? How do you handle nature? How do you handle tradition? The sense you get is one of consistent search in Cezanne.
The skulls became a very significant motif for Cezanne at the end of his life. He was very conscious of his own mortality. Cezanne also painted a very moving series of portraits of his gardener, Monsieur Vallier, who looked after the garden and helped Cezanne move the large canvases in and out of this studio. The portraits of Vallier are very moving, very Rembrandtesque. They're extremely thickly painted, emphasizing the old man's rugged features and gnarled hands. And I think that Cezanne saw in this old man a kind of premonition of his own old age and his impending death.
I am in such a state of mental disturbance, I fear at moments that my frail reason may give way. Will I ever attain the end for which I have striven so much and so long? I hope so. But I am old, ill, and I have sworn to myself to die painting.
In mid-October 1906, Cezanne was caught in a storm in this very neighborhood. He collapsed in the rain. A passing laundryman put him on his cart, trundled him back to the Rue Bourlegot in town.
Cezanne's final words are unknown, but his last letter was true to form. It was to his art supplier.
Monsieur, it is now 8 days since I asked you to send me 10 Burnt Lakes number 7, and I have had no reply. Whatever is the matter? An answer, and quick, please. Accept, monsieur, my distinguished greetings. Paul Cezanne.
An independent man, an artist proud to call himself provincial. A painter who paved the way for Cubism and the inspiring work of the 20th century. Paul Cezanne was, above all, a local, a native, a Provençal.
I have asked myself whether the short time given us would be better used in an attempt to understand the whole of the universe, or to assimilate what is within our reach.
On October the 20th, 1906, the painter's sister, Marie, wrote to his son.
Your father has been ill since Monday. He remained outside in the rain for several hours. He was brought back in a laundry cart, and 2 men had to carry him up to his bed. Early in the morning, he went into the garden to work on a portrait of Vallier. He came back dying.
Three days later, on October the 23rd, 1906, Paul Cezanne died. Even now, a century later, young artists pay homage to him and to his indelible influence on the course of modern art.
We must not be satisfied with retaining the beautiful formulas of our illustrious predecessors. Let us go forth to study nature. Let us try to free our minds. Let us strive to express ourselves according to our personal temperament. Paul Cezanne.
To learn more about the life and work of Paul Cezanne, visit the Cezanne in Provence website on pbs.org. Cezanne in Provence is available on video cassette or DVD. The companion book is also available. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS.